Right now, it's an exciting time to be a Dragon Ball fan because in 2024 we have a lot coming our way. We have the new Dragon Ball Super manga arc, we have Dragon Ball Daima, as well as Dragon Ball Sparkling Blast, all coming in 2024. But let's face it, for a Dragon Ball fan in 2023, it was terrible. Not only did we come into 2023 with Toyotaro taking a few months off on the Dragon Ball Super manga after the Granola arc, which received mixed reviews at best, decided to retell the Dragon Ball Super superhero movie, which once again was a movie that got mixed reviews at best. Some people liked it, some people didn't. I thought it was pretty mid with some nice moments, but the entire story got retold and was told over the span of the entire 2023 year. Now, if we'd got superhero as a manga arc without the movie coming before it, I'd actually think, okay, this is an okay arc. It wasn't. We got the movie first, and this has led the current Dragon Ball Super fandom product enthusiasm zeitgeist in a complete mess. Obviously, Dragon Ball Super is at the frontier of what is being released continuously by Dragon Ball. Obviously, we have Super Dragon Ball Heroes as well, but we all know that that's basically just promotional material for a game. And whilst it has some cool ideas and some cool moments, it really has no substance. But because of the lack of interest in a superhero retelling, which has basically been shoved down our throats, people are now starting to question Super's legacy. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't question whether Super's legacy is good or not. Is it good? Is it trash? That's up to you essentially. And just before we get into this video, I'll even go on record saying it's nowhere near as good as Z. That has led a lot of people to start grouped with the dip in product interest due to the superhero retelling, as well as Daima's decision to turn Goku back into a kid, mimicking what GT did with Goku, comparing it to Dragon Ball GT again. And obviously the comparison comes from them both being continuations of the original Dragon Ball manga and Dragon Ball Z, the anime. In terms of their quality, I'm going to tell you why this is not a fair or close comparison between two different canonicities. Now, just some caveats. So this may be my attempt to, squash water, but here it goes. I like Dragon Ball GT. I think it's a good show, and I think anybody that's not seen it, and I know a lot of modern Dragon Ball fans certainly haven't seen it, and even when you get into arguments with them, you can tell that they haven't seen it. I highly suggest you go and watch the original Japanese subversion of Dragon Ball GT. You will enjoy it. Does that inherently mean it's good? No. Two things don't have to be true for one thing to be true. And that goes for Dragon Ball Super as well. Just because it isn't as good as the original Dragon Ball Z doesn't have to be trash or good. They aren't the only two options. And me saying that one series is better than another doesn't mean there's no redeeming qualities about the other series. Look, I own all the guidebooks to all the Dragon Ball series, including the GT Perfect files. I know a lot about Dragon Ball GT. I watched Dragon Ball GT initially in English when it first came on air on Cartoon Network, and then later watched the Japanese subversions, which are better than the English dub versions. Dragon Ball GT has a lot of redeeming qualities, a very good arc in it, and ends very well. However, it is not better than Dragon Ball Super, even if Super cut off and finished right now. So you could argue that this is a little bit of an unfair comparison as well in this regard, and that is the regard that Dragon Ball Super has technically 3 different continuities happening within it at the same time, which tell the stories from very different perspectives, actually add a lot of detail, and whereas GT only really has the Toei Dragon Ball GT story. It doesn't have its own manga. So obviously a major complaint about Dragon Ball GT. Now, if you like this personally, it's absolutely up to you. The first major mistake they made was turning Goku into a kid, and I do not care what anybody claims about this. Now, if they were going to turn Goku into a kid and turn him back into an adult later, it would have been more palatable, and that is literally what I'm hoping Dragon Ball Daima does. They've learned from their mistakes. However, the problem with Goku being a child was that it recontextualized your journey with Goku along the narrative. Whilst I understand they were trying to go for that young male shonen character, the Dragon Ball story had gone past that and into adulthood, and just like Goku, the Dragon Ball Z audience at that time had grown past that into adulthood and were more relatable to Goku as an adult. That was the big turnoff. Basically, its audience grew with Goku through that, where they then had to grow with a character who'd already gone through all these growth changes in terms of his personality, his character, his spirituality. He'd already done it. So even when trying to get Goku to be relatable to younger kids, this character's already grown way beyond what they could potentially compute, really. Then of course came the first arc of the Dragon Ball GT series, which was a complete and utter disaster. Now, it had a few nice moments yet again. I really liked Legic, who never really got explored, and we could have found out a lot about his character. You could even call him a precursor to the legendary assassin Hit. However, we even then got Lude, who obviously has heavily inspired the God of Destruction Moscow. Dragon Ball Super has taken and borrowed a lot of ideas from Dragon Ball GT. Like I said, just because I'm criticising it doesn't mean I cannot acknowledge there's good ideas in there. It's whether or not they were fully realised. And in most part in Dragon Ball GT they weren't, but that's not a problem exclusive to Dragon Ball GT. That also happens in Dragon Ball Super. The only difference is that Super still has a chance to fix it, because as we know, it's continuing past the superhero arc. But the Black Star Dragon Ball saga, essentially, which ran from episode 1 to 16, which is a large portion of Dragon Ball GT considering it only spanned 64 episodes, just wasn't up to any kind of level. I seriously hold this arc as the worst arc in any of the mainline series, and that doesn't include Super Dragon Ball Heroes, by the way. However, the Baby Saga in Dragon Ball GT was really good. It had an enticing villain that had a real motive and an agenda. Baby Saga also tied in the Spherians, who had a large link in history to the lore of original Dragon Ball and the Saiyans, so therefore you could argue that Goku going down the route of the Uzaru transformation line made a lot of sense. Had Goku gain a new transformation and show some growth in terms of his power-up. I have a love-hate relationship with Super Saiyan 4. I like its design, I also hate its design, and it makes no sense, but I like it conceptually and theologically. Super Saiyan 4 also got a successful depiction. It actually came across as a strong transformation, unlike Super Saiyan Blue, which basically always got beat unless we got a blue fusion. Unfortunately, that was quickly followed by the Super 17 arc, which once again is one of the worst arcs you'll watch in the entirety of the Dragon Ball mainline series. This arc is all over the place in terms of lore, has some interesting fights in it, but other than that there are no redeeming qualities about this arc, and it quickly ends, which is the good thing about it, and it lasts approximately 6 episodes, so not a lot. However, the beginning of the Shadow Dragon arc isn't a great start either. However, the concept of the Shadow Dragon arc is a very good one, and if executed right, it could be the perfect way to end even Dragon Ball Super if they want to go down a similar route, where the central focus of the last arc is on the Dragon Balls. The Shadow Dragon arc does end well, like I said. The battle with Ice and Nova Shenron are interesting, and the battle against Omega Shenron is interesting as well, and the fusion of Gogeta is pretty epic to watch. And one thing that Dragon Ball GT specifically does better than Dragon Ball Super: tension. This is because of the placement of the gods in Dragon Ball Super, where they never seem to get surpassed. There's always that safety blanket there, whereas in GT, if they lost that particular battle against Baby or against Omega Shenron, the universe was doomed. You really felt like the characters had to win. The dramatic tension was higher. However, like I keep saying, it is not better than Dragon Ball Super. Now, with Dragon Ball GT, it peaks at the Baby Saga. The Shadow Dragon Saga is good, but it's a tale of two halves pretty much. Dragon Ball Super, whilst it does definitely have its weaker arcs, and it has 3 different continuities where some arcs are better than the other continuities depiction of those arcs, it is far more consistently at a certain level than Dragon Ball GT is. If we use the Baby Saga as the peak of GT, there are quite a few arcs now in Dragon Ball Super that are at least a match for it. So like I said, Dragon Ball GT definitely has redeeming qualities. It's definitely worth a watch. The trope that Dragon Ball GT has lots of fantastic ideas, they just weren't fully realised or delivered as well as they should be, is a trope for a reason, because it's correct. Now, I won't really delve into all of the arcs like I did in the manner I did just GT, but in terms of the arcs that you could say rival the Baby Saga in terms of quality and substance, you could look at the Battle of Gods movie adaptation. Now, obviously with Super, like I said, it is unfair. There are different adaptations that are better than the others, because the movie adaptation of Battle of Gods is better than that of the anime and the manga. But, you know, it is still part of the story. Resurrection of F was rubbish. However, without Resurrection of F, a lot of later events wouldn't be possible, and I'll get into that in just a moment, and why Super still can actually redeem itself, whereas GT can't. So the Baby Saga is a lot better than Resurrection of F. It's also a lot better than the Champa Saga, Universe 6 versus Universe 7. Once again, me saying the Baby Saga doesn't mean that the Champa arc has no redeeming qualities. Then we get onto the Future Trunks arc. For me, this arc rivals the Baby Saga in both the anime and the manga. In fact, I would say the manga version is the better version of the Future Trunks arc. The Tournament of Power in the anime is extremely entertaining, has a lot of flaws, but it's definitely a great watch, and it would be one of the best arcs in GT if it was in GT. Then if we go beyond that in the manga and the movies, the Broly movie is at that level as well. The Moro arc, I would say, each time I read the Moro arc, my opinion of it improves, and I actually think it is now the best arc in the entirety of Dragon Ball Super, and the best arc post Dragon Ball Z. In fact, I may be going out on a limb here, I don't think it's that much worse than the Cell Saga and the Buu sagas. The Granola arc has a lot of positive moments. Is it as good as the Baby Saga? I would say the Baby Saga is a little bit better, but it's not that much worse. I would still say it's better overall than the Shadow Dragon arc. And then of course came the superhero movie, which I would say is pretty mid as well. It's hard to dissect what I truly think about that because I'm so fed up with this manga retelling. I think if I had to put them both in a vacuum, the movie and the manga, I'd probably say the manga is slightly better because it goes further into the story detail of it. Unfortunately, it's just not what we needed right now. So I believe the reason these comparisons between Super and GT are coming up again are really because of the product's enthusiasm surrounding Dragon Ball Super right now, due to the last year we've had in terms of the delivery of what we've got in terms of the superhero retelling. However, Dragon Ball Super is consistently at a higher level and has multiple arcs at least equal, if not better, than the best arc of Dragon Ball GT. So to put this all into perspective a little bit, if I said the weakest arc of Dragon Ball Z was, let's say, the Buu saga, which was an 8 out of 10, then I would give maybe the Baby saga from Dragon Ball GT a 7 out of 10. All the other arcs, as you can probably tell, are not as good as that arc in GT from my opinion. You may have a different opinion, let me know down in the comment section. However, Dragon Ball Super has multiple arcs that are at 7 out of 10. Whilst it may never reach the 8 out of 10 of the Buu saga, it has multiple arcs that are equivalent to that 7 out of 10 that I just gave to the Baby saga. That includes the Battle of Gods movie, the Future Trunks arc in both continuities, the Tournament of Power in the anime, the Broly movie, the Moro arc. Even beyond the top tier arcs from those two continuities, let's say I gave the Shadow Dragon arc a 5 out of 10. Super has multiple arcs at that level as well. The Champa arc, the Granola arc, the Superhero arc. Now, like I said, Super does have a lot of continuities going for it, and it is an unfair advantage, but if you look at them as products, Dragon Ball Super is far more consistent as a product than Dragon Ball GT is. Neither of them reach the heights of Z, and that's what everybody's problems with these two continuities are. However, Dragon Ball Super does still have something going for it that Dragon Ball GT doesn't have anymore. That is, that it is still going. Dragon Ball Super can still have retroactive provisions made to previous arcs by basically introducing things in new arcs. Case in point, look at Resurrection of F. A poor arc in a vacuum on its own is not that enjoyable. It has a good fight and that's pretty much it. However, this arc is enhanced by later events, such as when Frieza returns for the Tournament of Power, such as when Frieza returns for the Broly movie, such as when Frieza returns at the end of the Granola arc. He keeps returning, I know, but ultimately, without Resurrection of F, the later events wouldn't be possible, so that enhances that previous arc. You could even look at the Champa arc as well. What happened in the Champa arc, the Universe 6 vs Universe 7 tournament, eventually bled into the Tournament of Power. Now, I don't have a lot of faith about this happening because I don't have the faith in Toyotaro as a writer in comparison to Oda, but if you look at One Piece, if you've watched One Piece or read One Piece up until the Marineford arc, then you wouldn't think it was that good of a series. However, with the Marineford arc, it ties all the story threads, narrative arcs, character arcs together so well that brings everything back into line and moving into the right direction. Super is still capable of that. It does have a lot of good ideas as well that could be tied together. Earlier I credited GT with actually maintaining the tension that's not really there in Dragon Ball Super and is one of Super's biggest weaknesses, but one thing I'll credit Super with is it does introduce a lot of new lore, and it's very expansive lore, whereas GT pretty much stayed within itself inside the same universe. But even without that happening, it still has more quality on a more consistent basis than Dragon Ball GT. It is just simply better than Dragon Ball GT. That doesn't mean I hate GT, it doesn't mean GT is bad and you shouldn't consume it. There are moments in Dragon Ball GT that eclipse those moments in Dragon Ball Super, and I've often said that if the Baby Saga was taken out of GT and put into Super, Super would be better for it. And I'm definitely an advocate for some sort of multiversal storyline that makes the continuity of GT somewhat canon to Super in a very similar way to how comics do it for example, DC with Infinite Crisis, and maybe even the MCU with what they're doing with the different timelines now. And you could argue that's what Super Dragon Ball Heroes does, but in a mainline series it could be done in a much more meaningful way. But that's all from me. Let me know your counter arguments down in the comment section. Make sure you subscribe so we can talk about this further in the future. Until next time, Ad Astra.